I never expected that a plumbing disaster would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when my upstairs neighbor's apartment decided to imitate a waterfall. Before that Saturday, my life was a neat grid of predictable patterns. I'm Miles, a graphic designer, and I thrive on order. My apartment was my sanctuary, a perfectly calibrated space where every book was aligned and every surface was clear. I worked from home, which meant my world was often confined to those four walls, the quiet hum of my computer, and the view from my window. My routine was my armor. Wake up at 7, coffee, work until noon, lunch, more work, a walk if I felt ambitious, dinner, and then either reading or scrolling until my eyes grew heavy. It was a life of quiet containment. Not unhappy, exactly, but muted. It was like living in a beautifully designed room with the soundproofing turned all the way up. There was a particular kind of loneliness in it, a loneliness so familiar it had started to feel like a feature of my own personality rather than a circumstance I could change. From my living room window, I had a perfect view of the building's central courtyard. It was a lovely space, or at least it had the potential to be. It was mostly just a sad rectangle of grass with a few lonely benches. But it was also where I first saw him. His name, I'd learn later, was Julian. He had moved in a few weeks prior, into the unit directly above mine. I saw him out there one afternoon, not just passing through, but studying the space. He had a sketchbook and was pacing the lawn, head tilted, a look of intense concentration on his face that I found immediately captivating. He was handsome in a way that felt both classic and rugged. He had dark, thick hair that fell across his forehead when he looked down, and a strong, straight posture that suggested a life lived outdoors. He seemed confident, at ease in his own skin, the kind of person who strikes up conversations with strangers in line for coffee. He was, in my mind, the polar opposite of me. I watched him that day, and in the days that followed, creating an entire narrative for him from my third-floor window. He definitely had a girlfriend, probably someone equally stunning and outgoing. They probably went on adventurous weekend trips and hosted dinner parties. He was a settled, happy, and very straight man who just happened to be my new neighbor. I filed him away in the mental cabinet labeled unattainable and tried to go on with my life. But it's hard to ignore someone who lives directly above you. I became attuned to the small sounds of his life. The faint thud of his boots when he came home, the muffled bass of his music, the scrape of a chair. These were the mundane soundtracks of proximity. But for me, they were small reminders of the vibrant life happening just a few feet above my own quiet existence. I'd see him in the lobby sometimes, and we'd exchange the standard neighborly nod. A tight, polite smile from me, a warm, easy grin from him. Each brief interaction felt like a small electric shock, leaving me flustered and overly analytical for hours afterward. What did that smile mean? Was he just being friendly? Of course he was just being friendly. It was a ridiculous spiral, and I knew it. Then came that Saturday. I was at my desk, trying to finalize a logo for a client, when I heard a strange noise from above. It wasn't the usual sound of footsteps or music. It was a deeper, more troubling groan, followed by a persistent dripping. I frowned, trying to ignore it, but the dripping grew faster, more insistent. A dark spot appeared on my ceiling, directly above a shelf of my most prized art books. My heart leaped into my throat. The spot grew, darkening like a storm cloud. Then, with a soft, sickening sigh, the paint blistered and a single drop of water fell, landing on the glossy cover of a photography monograph. Another drop followed, then another. It was a slow, deliberate torture. I scrambled, pulling the books off the shelf, my hands shaking. The trickle became a steady stream. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I grabbed a bucket from under the sink just as the stream turned into a full-blown shower, cascading onto my floor, my rug, my carefully ordered life. I called the building's emergency line, my voice tight with distress. While I was on the phone, frantically explaining the situation, there was a frantic pounding on my door. I threw it open to find Julian standing there, his face pale with horror. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his shirt clinging to his chest. "Oh my God," he said, his eyes wide as he looked past me at the deluge in my living room. "I am so sorry." A pipe burst under my sink. I tried to shut it off, but he trailed off, gesturing helplessly. Within minutes, the whole scene was chaos. A building superintendent arrived, shutting off water mains and barking into a walkie-talkie. Plumbers stomped through my apartment, their boots leaving muddy tracks on my floor. My bucket was overflowing. The sound of the water, which had finally been stopped at the source, was replaced by the grim dripping of the aftermath. My ceiling was ruined. A good portion of my living room was a swamp. Julian was a constant, apologetic presence through it all. He helped me mop up the water, his earlier confidence replaced by a deep, genuine mortification. "I can't believe this," he kept saying, running a hand through his damp hair. "Your apartment, your things." He looked at the stack of damp books I'd managed to rescue, and his expression was one of pure anguish. After the plumbers and the superintendent had made their initial assessment, the building manager, a stern woman named Gloria, delivered the verdict. Julian's apartment was uninhabitable. The flooring was completely saturated and would need to be torn out. The repairs would take, at minimum, several days, maybe even a week. "We have a guest unit," she said, tapping on her tablet, "but it's booked for a conference this week. The earliest we could get you in is next Friday." Julian's shoulders slumped. He looked utterly defeated. "Right," he said quietly. "A hotel." Then, he looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and suddenly very alone. And in that moment, something inside me broke. All my carefully constructed walls of reserve and caution just crumbled. The sight of this capable, confident man looking so lost was more than I could handle. The words left my mouth before I had even fully formed the thought. "You can stay with me," I said. Both Julian and Gloria turned to look at me, their expressions identical masks of surprise. "I have a spare room," I continued, my voice gaining a bit of strength. "It's small, but it has a bed. It's better than a hotel." Julian stared at me, his eyes searching my face. I could see a flicker of disbelief, then a wave of immense relief. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice soft. "After I just flooded your home." "It wasn't your fault," I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. "It was the building's ancient plumbing. And anyway, it seems like the least I can do." I had no idea why I felt that way, why I felt indebted to the man who had inadvertently caused this chaos, but I did. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, tired, and deeply grateful smile that made my stomach do a little flip. "Miles, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Julian," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you. Seriously. You have no idea." As I shook his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip, I had the distinct and terrifying feeling that the water damage to my apartment was about to be the least of the disruptions to my life. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in awkwardness. Julian moved in with just a duffel bag and a backpack, his presence immediately altering the carefully balanced ecosystem of my apartment. He was bigger than the space seemed to allow, his frame filling doorways, his deeper voice absorbing the silence I was so used to. We tiptoed around each other, both literally and figuratively, murmuring sorry and excuse me every time we passed in the narrow hallway. I tried to act casual, as if having a handsome stranger camp out in my spare room was a perfectly normal occurrence. But my mind was a frantic buzz of anxieties. Was my apartment clean enough? Was he judging my taste in coffee? Did he notice that I had rewatched the same episode of a comfort show 3 times that night just to have something to do with my hands? He was unfailingly polite, constantly thanking me, offering to order food or help clean up the lingering mess from the flood. His gratitude was so profuse it almost became another layer of awkwardness between us. But slowly, very slowly, the strangeness began to wear off. It had to, didn't it? You can only sustain that level of polite distance for so long when you're sharing a bathroom. The forced proximity began to work its strange magic. It started with coffee. On the second morning, I woke up to the smell of it already brewing. I walked into the kitchen to find Julian, looking much more rested, leaning against the counter with 2 mugs already poured. "Morning," he said with that easy grin. Figured it was my turn. "Hope you don't mind." That small gesture felt monumental. It was a shift from guest to something else. We sat at my small kitchen table, the silence comfortable for the first time. He asked me about my work, and instead of giving my usual vague, one-sentence answer, I found myself actually explaining it. I showed him the logo I had been working on when the flood started. He leaned in close to look at my screen, and I was acutely aware of the smell of his soap and the warmth radiating from his arm, just inches from mine. "Wow," he said, genuinely impressed. You're really talented. The way you balanced the negative space there. That's clever. He wasn't just being polite. He saw the details, the choices I had made. He understood the language of my work. No one had ever reacted like that before. It felt good. It felt too good. In return, I asked him about his own work. I mentioned I'd seen him in the courtyard. His face lit up. He was a landscape architect, he explained, and he'd been thinking about the courtyard since the day he moved in. He saw it not as a sad patch of grass, but as a space full of potential. It could be a place where people actually want to be, he said, his voice filled with a passion that was infectious. Not just a shortcut to the parking garage. It needs life. Flow. He grabbed his sketchbook from his bag and, right there at my kitchen table, started showing me his ideas. His drawings weren't just technical blueprints. They were beautiful, artistic renderings of curving pathways, benches nestled under flowering trees, and a small water feature that would create a soothing sound. He spoke of creating pockets of intimacy and open areas for gathering, of using native plants to attract birds and pollinators. He was painting a picture with words and pencil strokes, and I was completely captivated. This confident, handsome man had a soul that spoke in gardens. Later that day, we tackled the pile of my water-damaged books. The initial panic had subsided, and now all that was left was the sad, laborious task of trying to save what I could. I had laid them out, pages warped and stiff. I figured I would have to do it alone, but Julian wouldn't hear of it. "We'll set up an assembly line," he declared, rolling up his sleeves. So we spent the afternoon on my living room floor, a team of 2 in a makeshift art hospital. He was surprisingly gentle, his large, capable hands handling the fragile, damp paper with incredible care. We worked in a comfortable rhythm, carefully separating the pages, blotting them with paper towels, and pressing them under heavy weights. At one point, we both reached for the same roll of paper towels, and our hands brushed. It was a tiny, fleeting contact, over in a second, but it sent a jolt straight through me. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I glanced up at him, my heart hammering, but he was just looking at our setup, a small, focused smile on his face. "This might actually work," he said. The moment passed, but it stayed with me, a tiny ember of heat in my chest. He treated my books, my passions, with a quiet reverence that felt more intimate than any conversation we'd had. That evening, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor, surrounded by our paper towel and book triage center. The earlier awkwardness felt like a distant memory. We talked for hours. He told me about growing up in a small town, about the winding path that led him to landscape architecture. And then, in a moment of quiet vulnerability, he told me why it meant so much to him. "My last relationship ended pretty badly," he said, staring at a crease in the pizza box. "She was a lawyer. Very ambitious, very driven. She never really got what I did. She thought playing in the dirt wasn't a real career. She wanted me to be more like her. I guess," he shrugged, but I could see the lingering hurt in his eyes. "I just think creating a space where someone can sit and feel a moment of peace, that's important. That has value." And there it was, a crack in the confident facade, a glimpse of a past hurt, of an insecurity that made him seem so much more real, so much more attainable. He wasn't just the handsome, perfect man from my window view. He was someone who had been misunderstood, who had felt small. He was someone who, like me, valued quiet things. In that moment, watching him in the low light of my living room, surrounded by the beautiful chaos he had brought into my life, my quiet, contained admiration tipped over into something far more dangerous. It tipped over into hope. A few nights into his stay, sleep decided to abandon me entirely. It wasn't the lingering smell of damp drywall or the gentle snores I could sometimes hear from the spare room. It was my own mind, buzzing with a nervous energy I couldn't switch off. Every quiet moment was filled with thoughts of Julian, replaying our conversations, analyzing his smiles, reliving the brief touch of our hands. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. My perfectly ordered world had been thrown into a delightful, heart-stopping disarray. Giving up on sleep, I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The apartment was dark, bathed in the cool blue glow of the city lights outside. As I passed the living room, I saw a silhouette on the couch. It was Julian. He was sitting perfectly still, his elbows on his knees, staring out the window at the sleeping city below. He looked so solitary, so lost in thought. "Hey," I whispered, not wanting to startle him. "Can't sleep?" He turned, and even in the dim light, I could see the tension in his face. "Hey," he replied, his voice a low murmur. "No, just a lot on my mind, I guess." He gestured to the empty spot on the couch beside him. An invitation. My heart did a slow, heavy thump against my ribs, but I walked over and sat down, leaving a careful, respectable distance between us. We sat in silence for a long moment, just watching the distant headlights of cars moving like blood cells through the veins of the city. "It's weird," he finally said, his voice quiet. "Feeling so displaced. Even though your couch is 1,000 times more comfortable than the cot they would have given me in a hotel, I just feel unmoored." He confessed that the whole flood incident had shaken him more than he'd let on. The feeling of his own space being so suddenly and violently disrupted had left him feeling fragile. I found myself telling him that I understood. I told him how my own apartment was my shell, my armor, and how the water cascading from the ceiling had felt like a personal violation. We talked for what felt like hours, our voices low and soft in the sleeping apartment. We weren't just talking about burst pipes anymore. We were talking about what it meant to feel safe, about the spaces we build around ourselves to keep the world at bay, and how jarring it is when those walls are breached. He was so easy to talk to. The carefully constructed persona I usually presented to the world melted away, and I was just me. And he seemed to like that person. He listened intently, his gaze fixed on my face, making me feel like I was the only person in the world. As the conversation wound down, a comfortable silence settled over us again. The initial adrenaline of our late-night meeting had faded, replaced by a deep, quiet intimacy. He yawned, a deep, shuddering intake of breath. "Sorry," he mumbled, his eyelids looking heavy. He shifted, leaning his head back against the couch cushions. I thought he was settling in to try and get some rest. But then, slowly, as if in a dream, his head began to drift sideways. It was like watching something in slow motion. I held my breath, my entire body rigid. His head came to rest, gently, on my shoulder. Time stopped. The whole world seemed to shrink down to that single point of contact. The weight of his head, the warmth of him seeping through my t-shirt, the soft, ticklish brush of his hair against my neck. My first instinct was to flinch, to move, to break the contact that was sending a cascade of fireworks through my nervous system. But I didn't. I couldn't. It felt too important, too fragile. He let out a soft sigh, the sound vibrating through my collarbone, and his breathing deepened, evening out into the steady rhythm of sleep. He was asleep. On me. My mind was screaming. 1,000 conflicting thoughts battled for supremacy. This is crazy. This doesn't mean anything. He's just exhausted. This means everything. Don't move. Don't you dare move. So I sat there, motionless. I sat there as the blue light of the night gave way to the soft gray of pre-dawn, and then the warm, golden glow of sunrise. My shoulder ached, my leg had gone asleep, but I didn't care. I just sat there, the silent guardian of his rest, feeling the rise and fall of his chest with every breath. I watched the sun come up over the city, feeling a sense of profound, terrifying tenderness that I had never experienced in my life. This moment felt like a secret, something sacred that belonged only to the two of us in the quiet of my living room. When he finally stirred, his eyes fluttering open, the look that passed between us in that first, silent moment of waking was one of dawning awareness. The dynamic between us had just been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. The morning after was brutal. The intimate, dreamlike connection of the night had evaporated in the harsh light of day, leaving behind a thick, suffocating awkwardness. It was like we had shared this profound secret, and now neither of us knew how to speak the language of it. Making coffee, a ritual that had become a comfortable start to our day, was now a minefield of averted gazes and clumsy movements. "Morning," he mumbled, not quite meeting my eye as he reached for a mug. "Sleep okay?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally high to my own ears. It was a stupid question. I knew exactly how he'd slept. Yeah, better. Thanks," he said, and that was it. The conversation died there, sputtering out into the strained silence. He retreated to the spare room, and I retreated to my desk, but I couldn't focus. My screen blurred in front of me. All I could think about was the weight of his head on my shoulder. My internal monologue was a relentless torture chamber. I replayed the entire night, frame by frame, analyzing every word, every silence, every breath. Had I imagined the intimacy? Was I just a convenient pillow? The hopeful, soaring part of my brain insisted it was a turning point, a clear sign of something deeper. But the louder, more dominant part, the part conditioned by years of caution and self-protection, was screaming that I was an idiot. I was a cliché, the lonely guy falling for the handsome stranger who was just being friendly, just being tired. The fear of rejection was a cold, heavy knot in my stomach. I had let my guard down, and now the potential for pain was immense. The tension was a third person in the apartment, a hulking, silent ghost that sat between us at all times. Later that day, Julian emerged from the spare room with a somber expression. "Just got a call from Gloria," he announced, his voice carefully neutral. "They're ahead of schedule. My apartment will be ready tomorrow morning." "Oh," I said, my voice flat. That's great, but it didn't feel great. It felt like a countdown clock had just been activated, ticking down the final hours of this strange, temporary life we had built. The news hung in the air, underscoring the finality of it all. He was leaving. This would all be over. He would go back to his life upstairs, and I would go back to my life down here, and we would revert to being neighbors who exchanged polite nods in the lobby. The thought was unbearable. The silence in my apartment, once a comfort, now seemed like a threat, a preview of the profound quiet that would descend once he was gone. I spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet panic, trying to mentally prepare myself for the inevitable goodbye. I was mourning the loss of his presence before he had even packed his bag. Every small sound he made, the zip of his duffel bag, the rustle of his clothes, was a painful reminder that our time was running out. I tried to convince myself it was for the best. Things could go back to normal. My routine could be restored. But I knew, with a certainty that ached in my bones, that my old normal was gone forever. Julian had walked in and rearranged the furniture of my entire world, and I had no idea how to put it back. The fear was now completely intertwined with hope. What if he felt it too? What if the awkwardness wasn't about regret, but about a shared, unspoken tension? What if he was just as scared as I was? The duel inside my head was exhausting. Hope would surge, painting a vibrant picture of a future where this was just the beginning. Then fear would counterattack, showing me a lonely scene of me watching him from my window, just like before, only now with the painful memory of what it felt like to have him close. The possibility of something wonderful was now inextricably linked to the possibility of crushing disappointment. As the sun set on our last evening as roommates, I felt suspended in an agony of uncertainty, waiting for a verdict I was too afraid to hear. The next morning arrived with a sense of grim finality. The air was thick with things unsaid. Julian finished packing his few belongings, folding his clothes with a neat precision that seemed out of place with the emotional chaos swirling around us. I hovered uselessly in the kitchen, making coffee we probably wouldn't drink, just to have something to do with my hands. He brought his duffel bag into the living room and set it by the door. "Well," he said, turning to face me. "I guess this is it." His smile was strained, a poor imitation of the easy grin I had grown so used to. "Miles, I can't thank you enough. For everything. You really saved me." "It was nothing," I said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. "I'm glad your apartment is fixed." My heart was a lead weight in my chest. This was it. The polite goodbye. The end scene. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. He took a step toward the door, then stopped. He stood there for a long moment, his back to me, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second a tiny hammer blow. "Just leave," I thought. "Please just go so this can be over." Then he turned around. His face was a mess of conflict, his brow furrowed. "Look," he started, his voice rough. "About the other night on the couch." My stomach plummeted. Here it comes. The gentle letdown. I was so tired. I hope I didn't give you the wrong idea speech. I braced myself, steeling my expression into one of polite neutrality. "You don't have to explain," I said quickly, trying to cut him off, to spare myself the humiliation. "No, I do," he insisted, taking a step closer. He was looking directly at me now, his eyes intense. "I wasn't just tired, Miles. I mean, I was, but that's not why I fell asleep." He took a shaky breath. I haven't slept that well in years. I felt safe. The word hung in the air between us. Safe. It was the last thing I expected him to say. It landed in my chest, a warm, spreading glow that began to melt the knot of anxiety. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his own nervousness. "And there's something else I have to tell you," he said, his voice dropping lower. "This is going to sound completely insane. And I don't blame you if you want to slam the door in my face after I say it." He paused, and I just stared, unable to form a single word. "The pipe bursting," he said, the words coming out in a rush. It wasn't a total accident." I blinked. "What?" "There was a leak," he explained, his gaze unwavering. "A small one. The building knew about it. They were scheduled to fix it next month. But I'd seen you. In the courtyard, in the lobby. I wanted to talk to you for weeks, but I couldn't figure out how. I'm not usually like this, I swear, but every time I thought about just knocking on your door, I froze." He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "So the leak. I saw it as an opportunity. A really, really stupid, high-risk opportunity. I didn't think it would be this bad, I swear. I just nudged it. I messed with the fitting a little. I thought it would just cause a small, manageable crisis that would give me an excuse to finally talk to you." He shook his head, a look of profound shame on his face. "It was the craziest, most desperate thing I've ever done. And I am so sorry for the damage, and for lying to you." I stood there, completely stunned, processing his confession. He had orchestrated this. The chaos, the water, the displacement, all of it, just to meet me? My mind reeled. It was manipulative. It was reckless. It was objectively nuts. And it was, without a single doubt, the most wildly, breathtakingly romantic thing I had ever heard in my entire life. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the painful uncertainty that had been plaguing me for days, it all just evaporated. It was replaced by a dizzying, giddy sense of disbelief. A laugh bubbled up from my chest. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a full, unrestrained peal of laughter, born of pure, unadulterated relief. Julian's face, which had been tight with terror, slackened in confusion, then broke into a look of cautious hope as he saw the genuine joy in my eyes. "You're insane," I said, my voice choked with laughter. "You're absolutely, certifiably insane." "So you're not furious?" he asked, a tentative smile starting to form on his lips. "Furious?" I shook my head, my grin so wide my face hurt. "Julian, I've been torturing myself for 2 days thinking I was a complete deluded idiot for hoping." I trailed off, my own confession hanging in the air. Understanding dawned in his eyes, bright and clear. He closed the remaining distance between us in a single step. The world seemed to slow down again, just like it had on the couch, but this time it was filled with a buzzing, electric certainty. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a tangible pull, a magnetism that had been there all along, just waiting to be acknowledged. A week later, a real week, not a chaotic, flood-induced one, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Julian standing there, looking impossibly handsome in a way that now felt like it belonged to me. He was holding a bottle of red wine and a small, potted plant. "A housewarming gift for myself," he said, gesturing with the plant. "And this," he held up the wine, "is to properly thank you for your hospitality. Again, you really don't have to," I said, smiling as I took the bottle from him. I turned to walk to the kitchen to get a corkscrew, but his hand on my arm stopped me. I turned back, my heart starting its familiar, frantic rhythm. "I think I do," he said softly. And before the cork had even thought about leaving the bottle, he leaned in, cupped my face in his free hand, and kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of absolute certainty, of relief, of pent-up longing finally unleashed. It was firm and gentle and perfect, and it tasted like a new beginning. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of startling color. The awkwardness of our first days as roommates was replaced by the delightful, fumbling awkwardness of a new relationship. We went on actual dates, the kind where you don't have to worry about a leaking ceiling interrupting the conversation. We walked through parks, his professional commentary on the landscaping making me see the world in a new way. I, in turn, dragged him to art galleries, explaining the nuances of composition and color theory, and he listened with that same focused intensity that had first captivated me. My apartment, once a solitary sanctuary, became our shared space. He helped me repaint the water-stained wall, the two of us laughing and getting more paint on ourselves than on the plaster. We filled the blank space with a large, abstract canvas that we picked out together. His potted plant sat on the windowsill, thriving. Slowly, my home stopped feeling like just mine and started feeling like ours. We were integrating our lives, not because of a crisis, but because we chose to every single day. The true testament to our new reality came a few months later. Julian's proposal for the courtyard had been approved by the building. He had spent weeks overseeing the work, and now it was finished. One warm evening, he took my hand and led me outside. The sad patch of grass was gone. In its place was a beautiful, living space. Graceful stone paths curved through beds of wildflowers and native grasses. A small, bubbling fountain provided a gentle, soothing soundtrack. New wooden benches were tucked into quiet corners, shaded by young trees. It was exactly as he had described it from his sketches, a place of peace and life. We sat on one of the new benches, the one with the best view of the fountain. Residents were actually using the space now, reading, talking quietly, enjoying the evening air. It was alive. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice full of genuine awe. "You did this." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "We did," he corrected me gently. He pointed toward a specific spot near the main entrance. "That's where I was standing," he said, "the first time I saw you walk by. I was trying to figure out how I was going to get the courage to talk to you. And I looked up, and there you were." We sat there for a moment in comfortable silence, the memory of his ridiculous, desperate plan now a cherished piece of our own private mythology. Looking at him, at the incredible, vibrant space he had created, I thought about how my own life had been so radically redesigned. I had built my world around order and control, convinced it was the only way to feel safe. I thought a breach in my walls was the worst thing that could happen. But the flood, the chaos, the complete upending of my quiet routine, it wasn't a disaster. It was an irrigation. It had washed away the lonely silence and allowed something new and beautiful to grow in its place. Sometimes, I realized, you have to let your carefully constructed world get a little bit flooded. You have to risk the mess. Because sometimes, that's the only way to let the light and the love get in.